What did Edinburgh really look like before the new town? Before wide streets, open spaces and planned expansion? And what did it feel like to live in a city shaped by defence, crowding and centuries of pressure? In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, maps and engravings to life. The goal isn't just to look at the past, but to step into it, to move through these scenes and see the city as it once was. We're going to move around, change camera angles and shift perspective. And if you stay until the end, I'll show how these same places look today, revealing how Edinburgh transformed over time. I want to start a bit earlier, right at this drawing. The drawing takes us back to around the mid-1400s, long before the Edinburgh we usually picture. It's not an exact reconstruction, but it shows the city in roughly the way it existed then. At this point, the town is really just stretched along a narrow ridge of land. The castle sits right at the top, planted into the rock, and everything else runs downhill from there. There isn't much room to spread out. Steep ground on both sides keeps the settlement pinned in place, and that simple fact ends up shaping how the city grows for centuries. This view looks at Edinburgh from the south in the mid-1600s. The city itself is still tightly packed along the ridge. The old town clings to the high ground, dense and dark, with most life compressed into a narrow strip of land. Around it, everything opens up. Once you're past the buildings, it's mostly fields, slopes and open ground, with very little built beyond the city's edge. Edinburgh hasn't spread outward yet. It's building upward instead. And by the 1700s, that pressure will shape daily life in ways that are hard to miss. When you look out over Edinburgh like this, your eye always ends up here. It's worth slowing down and focusing on the castle, because for centuries, it's been the centre of power in the city. For much of its history, Edinburgh Castle is defined by its position. It sits high above the city, built directly into the rock, more a continuation of the landscape than something placed on top of it. From the outside, it's meant to be seen from a distance, solid, elevated, and difficult to approach. Over time, the castle remains dominant, but the world around it starts to change. The city grows closer, movement gathers at its base, and the fortress becomes a constant presence in everyday life, not just a military one. Edinburgh Castle took shape as a royal fortress in the 11th century, likely under Malcolm III, then King of Scots, built to command the rock and defend the growing settlement below. Whoever controlled this rock controlled the city below it. For centuries, Edinburgh Castle sat at the centre of Scotland's political and military struggles. By the time we reached the 1700s, the castle was already hundreds of years old. It had been besieged, damaged, rebuilt, and fought over repeatedly, changing hands more often than almost any other place in Scotland. For most of the people who lived here, the castle meant routine, guard duty, maintenance, and a lot of waiting. Important history happened here, of course, but most days were probably just very long and very dull. And when you finally move inside the walls, the perspective shifts. The height and scale fall away, replaced by enclosed spaces where the castle isn't just a symbol, but a place where people lived, worked, and exercised power from within. If the Union flag looks a little off to you, you're not imagining it. This is what it looked like before Ireland was represented, back when the Union only reflected England and Scotland. That's it for Edinburgh Castle for now, but stay to the end of the video and I'll show you how it looks today. But for now, I want to move away from the rock and follow the city downhill toward another building that shaped Edinburgh just as deeply, in a very different way. This is the other end of Edinburgh's spine, the Palace of Holyrood House. The site begins as a royal abbey in the 12th century, founded under King David I, and over time it grows into Scotland's main royal residence in the city. By the 1500s, this is where kings and queens stay when they're in Edinburgh. By the 1700s, it's still the official royal residence in Scotland, though it's used far less than it once was, after the union of the crowns and Parliament in 1707 shifted real power south to London. This gateway would once have stood here as part of the Palace of Holyrood House, originally built in the early 1500s as the formal entrance into the royal precincts. The original gatehouse was actually demolished in 1753, and only fragments of it survive, woven into the buildings around the Abbey Courthouse today. It's strange to think how many people once passed through this exact point, when today it's easy to walk by, without realizing what stood here at all. And standing here now, it's clear this end of the city was never meant to feel sealed off. Compared to the castle, everything here feels flatter, more open, and far less defensive. This wasn't a last line of defense. It was a place for court life, ceremony, and governing, set right at the edge of the city and the countryside beyond. Holyrood Abbey was originally built as an Augustinian monastery and religious centre tied closely to the royal court. For centuries, it served as a place of worship, burial, and ceremony, sitting right beside what would later become the palace. By the late 1700s, Holyrood Abbey was no longer a functioning church. After the Reformation, it fell into disuse, and by the 18th century, it stood open to the sky, slowly breaking apart beside the palace. This is where royal life actually played out. Councils met, alliances were negotiated, and daily routines carried on just a short walk from the streets of the old town. You can feel the difference immediately. Less fortress, more residents. If you want to see what's left of this place today, stick around until the end and I'll show you some present-day views. For the moment though, let's move on and continue through Edinburgh as it was in the 1700s. This is a late 17th century north-facing view of Edinburgh, showing the city stretched along its ridge, with the castle anchoring the skyline above it. From this angle, you really see how tightly packed the old town was, and how abruptly the city drops away on either side. See how the city almost meets the water at the foot of the castle. That relationship is unusual, and it turns out to be one of the most important details in this view. This view looks across the Loch, the body of water just below Edinburgh Castle, towards St Cuthbert's Church, which sat just beyond the city's edge, surrounded by open ground. The loch itself wasn't natural. It was deliberately created in the 15th century by damming the valley, turning the north side of Edinburgh into a defensive barrier beneath the castle. Over time, it took on another role entirely. It became the city's dumping ground, a place for waste, sewage, and, on occasion, a public stage for executions and grim displays meant to be seen from above. By the 1700s, the Loch was less a body of water and more a problem the city would eventually have to deal with. And deal with it they did, beginning in the 1760s. The Loch was gradually drained and filled in to make room for one of the most ambitious projects the city had attempted, the North Bridge, stretching across the former valley to link the old town with new ground beyond it. In the background here, you can see the bridge taking shape, a sign that Edinburgh was no longer turning inward for defence, but outward for growth. What had once been a grim barrier beneath the castle became the foundation for expansion, opening the way to what would soon become the new town. Now that I think about it, there's something impressive about the scale of it. Creating an artificial loch when it was needed, then later draining and reshaping the land entirely when the city outgrew it. Coming back to this earlier view, it's striking how central the Loch once was to Edinburgh's shape and identity. What began as a defensive barrier beneath the castle later became a problem to solve, and eventually a space to reclaim. It's a reminder that Edinburgh didn't just grow over time, it kept reinventing itself. This is St Giles Cathedral in the late 1700s, a building that had already watched Edinburgh change again and again. By this point, it was far more than a church. It was a place where sermons could spark unrest, where political ideas were shaped, and where the city gathered in moments of tension as much as in moments of faith. What's striking is how closely everyday life pressed up against it. Homes and shops sit right against the walls, people moving in and out as part of their daily routines. St Giles's wasn't set apart or protected. It stood right in the flow of the city, absorbing its noise, its arguments, and its rhythms. Notice the statue standing in front of St Giles's here. It depicts King Charles II, restored to the throne after years of civil war, and placed in this space as a clear signal that royal authority had returned to Scotland. By the time of this view, in the late 1700s, the statue had already been standing for well over a century. Even in a city shaped by religion and reform, the presence of the crown was meant to be seen, right at the heart of public life. Stick around until the end of the video and I'll show you what this place looks like today. For now though, let's continue through the Old Town and stop at another of its landmarks. Right on the spine of Edinburgh, the Royal Mile, then more commonly known as the High Street, the main artery of the Old Town that runs downhill from Edinburgh Castle to Holyrood Palace, linking the city's two great seats of power, stands the Tron Kirk. The tower is familiar, but the details aren't quite the same as of today. Over the centuries, it's been repaired, altered and simplified, which is why it feels both recognisable and slightly off compared to today. Built in the 17th century, the Tron Kirk wasn't just a church, it was a marker of civic life, standing at one of the busiest crossroads in the city. This stretch of street was always loud and crowded. Traders calling out, carts rattling past, people moving between markets, courts and churches, with the Tron Kirk watching it all from the centre of the mile. If you were walking here back then, you'd feel it immediately. The noise, the press of bodies, the sense that everything important in the city somehow passed right in front of you. It must have felt less like a quiet place of worship and more like standing in the beating heart of Edinburgh itself. This first view looks toward the south side of Edinburgh Castle, where the rock drops away sharply into open ground. From here, the city feels compact and defensive, buildings packed tightly behind the castle, with very little room to spread out. But when we shift to the westward view, the feeling changes. The land opens up, the slopes soften, and Edinburgh starts to feel less like a fortress and more like a city on the edge of expansion. It's the same castle, but where you stand completely changes how the city reveals itself. This is another view of Edinburgh in 1746, but honestly, that part isn't the most interesting thing here. What really stands out is what's happening down in the foreground. These figures aren't working or marching, they're playing golf right here beneath the castle. At this point, golf is already a familiar pastime in Scotland, played on open ground like this long before formal courses existed. It's a small, almost casual detail, but it says a lot about everyday life. Even with the castle looming overhead, people still made time to play, compete, and enjoy the space around the city. This is Heriot's Hospital, seen from the south, one of the most striking buildings in Edinburgh at the time. Despite the name, this wasn't a hospital in the modern sense. It was founded in the 1600s as a charitable school, created to educate and support the children of the city's poorer families. The scale and symmetry matter here. This was meant to be a statement, showing that learning and discipline were seen as just as important as defense or religion. Not far away stands the Royal Infirmary, and this one really was about medicine. By the mid-17th century, it had become a centre for treating the sick and injured, and for teaching a new, more scientific approach to healthcare. Compared to Heriot's, it feels more formal and controlled, reflecting a growing belief that illness could be studied, managed, and improved through design and order. This is the Netherbow Port, just before it was taken down in 1764. For centuries, this gate marked the eastern edge of Edinburgh's Old Town, funneling everyone entering or leaving the city through a single, narrow point. Standing here at this moment, you're looking at the end of medieval Edinburgh, a city that had lived behind walls for hundreds of years, about to open itself up for good. This is the old toll booth of Edinburgh, standing right in the middle of the High Street. A toll booth was the civic heart of a Scottish burgher, part town hall, part courthouse, part prison, and often all three at once. A building everyone in the city would have known, and many would have feared. From the outside, it looks solid and unavoidable, sitting directly in the flow of daily life, reminding passers-by that law, punishment, and authority were never far away. Step inside and the mood changes immediately. The toll booth wasn't just an administrative building, it was a prison, a courtroom, and a holding place all at once. This dark interior would have held debtors, criminals, and political prisoners, often in cramped, harsh conditions, while the city carried on just outside its walls. It's a sharp contrast, busy streets above, confinement and uncertainty within. A very real part of everyday life in Old Edinburgh. Just before we look and compare how the city looks today, I want to stop here, on the High Street, what we now call the Royal Mile. In these late 18th century views, the street already feels like the backbone of Edinburgh. Tall tenements packed tightly together, carts and horses moving through the centre, people gathering, trading, arguing, living their daily lives almost on top of one another. This wasn't just a road, it was the city itself. A long, busy corridor where politics, commerce, punishment, and celebration all shared the same narrow space. And with that in mind, we're finally ready to jump forward and see just how much of the city has changed and how much is still unmistakably the same. Since the 1700s, Edinburgh Castle has been heavily rebuilt and reshaped, leaving it looking very different from the past. Today, it survives as Scotland's most powerful historic symbol. What's remarkable about this courtyard is how little it has changed. The layout and surrounding stone buildings are largely the same as they were in the 1700s, with repairs rather than major rebuilding. It's one of the few places in the castle where the past still feels physically intact. Since the 1700s, Holyrood Palace has survived as Scotland's official royal residence, while the abbey beside it fell into ruin. The palace has been rebuilt and refurbished over time, but far more gently than the castle, preserving its role as a lived royal space. Today, it's still used by the British royal family when they're in Scotland. Since the 1700s, St Giles Cathedral has been altered and restored many times, reflecting changing ideas about worship and the city itself. Today, it remains Edinburgh's principal church and one of its strongest links to the old town's past. Since the 1700s, St Cuthbert's Church has been rebuilt and expanded several times, adapting as the city around it changed. Today, it remains an active parish church, still sitting quietly beneath the castle. The Loch was completely drained in the early 1800s, erasing what had once been one of Edinburgh's defining features, making way for the North Bridge, which today still carries traffic between the Old Town and the New Town. Today, Loch lives on as Princes Street Gardens at the foot of the castle. Since the 1700s, the Royal Infirmary expanded and modernised as medicine advanced, eventually outgrowing this site and moving elsewhere. The original buildings didn't disappear completely. Much of this area is now part of the University of Edinburgh, still tied to teaching and learning. Since the 1700s, Heriot's Hospital continued its role as a charitable school, adapting to changing ideas about education rather than medicine. Today, it survives as George Heriot School, still using the same buildings for learning. The Trunkirk has changed far more than many of the places we've seen. Since the 1700s, its interior was stripped out and rebuilt multiple times, and today only the tower and outer shell remain. Unlike the tightly packed buildings around it, the kirk now stands alone, a rare open break in the dense spine of the Royal Mile. The High Street still follows the same uphill line toward the castle as it did in the 1700s. The climb, the slope, and the sense of direction haven't changed, even though almost everything built along it has. Edinburgh is a city shaped by layers rather than replacement. Instead of wiping the slate clean, each generation built on what was already here, leaving traces of different centuries pressed together. That's why the past never feels far away. It's still part of the city's everyday shape. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what city or scene you'd like to see next, and feel free to share any constructive feedback. Until next time, cheers.